Hey guys, welcome to the Gen Z Faith Summit. I'm Courtney.
And I'm Jason.
And today we are joined by Dave Yauk. I said that correctly?
Yep.
Awesome. Yes. And he is the founder of the Garden City Project. And he is an author and a songwriter, a professor and a producer and a businessman all in one. So I'm sure you're very busy because he's also a husband and a father of 4 children. And he's just really passionate about empowering others to use their gifts creatively in order to support the churches. So thank you, Dave, for taking the time to talk with us today.
Excited to be here.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's go ahead and jump right in. So this is the Gen Z Faith Summit. So we normally start by asking, what is the role of faith in parenting Gen Z?
The role of faith in parenting anywhere, it's to instill within anybody the tools really to deal with the real life. The world's going to throw a lot of different things at us, and faith is to live by things unseen, not by things that are seen. And the world's going to hand us all kinds of things that are seen that are going to take precedence over God, whether that be toys and technology, whether that be answers, and ours is to look a little bit deeper. So I think faith is absolutely a crucial part. As a parent, there's just so many questions that I never can answer. And I have to go to, we use a parenting technique a lot of times with our kids, and I call it the why behind the lie. And there's a lot of things going on in a child that you just can't see. You don't know what's there. You haven't picked up on it. You may not. And the best thing is to do is just to ask questions, decide what the why behind the lie is. And there's really an interactive process that goes on with the Lord there. It says in Proverbs that deep are the well springs of a man's heart, but the man of wisdom draws them out. And we're to ask the Lord richly for wisdom. So if we're trying to draw out the hearts of our children, draw out those deep waters, it's going to take wisdom. It's going to take faith. It's going to take trust on our part and a constant conversation with the Lord to parent our children rightly.
And so, Dave, what would you say is the role of technology in parenting, especially as it relates to like that wisdom and how we build faith with one another?
Yeah, well, I would say my biggest thing probably is everything today tends to draw away from a couple things, the table and the family face to face. This tends to be every parent's dilemma and saying everything's kind of pulling us away from this environment. And yet even science is telling us that this is the healthiest place for families to be when they're developing faith, developing virtue, character. And so the role of technology is always going to pull away from that. We have to find ways to press that back together. We live in the most connected culture that's ever probably been alive as far as globally, but yet it's all isolated. The suicide rates are through the roof, the isolation, the cutting, all the stuff's going. So we have to ask ourselves, as these social platforms, they're not really creating true social beings. They're creating isolated beings. They're shaping that. And the table has been the place that even science, and we know faith, Jesus starts with a family, a marriage, and a meal in the garden. And he ends with a family, a marriage, and a meal in Revelation. And he centers the whole Bible on a family, a marriage, and a meal in the middle of Scripture. And that's how the church is supposed to live. And so the whole Scripture is threaded by that storyline. It makes sense why science is identifying it as the key to a healthy family and why faith identifies as healthy family. And I think we just need to remember not to demonize, technology and say that's horrible or to demonize anything. But I operate under a simple kind of paradigm of reject, receive, and redeem. There's much to be rejected in this world that we just know that's evil. There's nothing to be redeemed about that. There's stuff to be received that it's just good. It's from the Lord. And then there's probably the majority of what I feel like our life falls into is that redeem category. Is we need to identify what is it supposed to be pointing towards and figure out ways to aim it at such. So if the meal and getting together and fellowshipping and truly understanding the one another's of the Bible, that can only take place in close proximity. And so technology can be helpful. We can find ways to find technologies that actually press us there. That's one of the things I love about what you guys are doing, just creating conversations. That's what our ministry does. We try to press out things around the table, and that's one way we can be helpful.
Awesome. And can you tell us a little bit about Garden City Project, just kind of what you guys do, what your heart is?
Sure. I will just tell you a story that I think really quickly expresses it. Was in Africa 20 years. Well, I guess it's 16 years ago. I don't want to pretend I'm older than I am. Nobody wants that. So about 16 years ago, was in Africa. I was studying Afro-Cuban percussion, and I went with a band, and I was touring there and went into the deep jungles of Africa. And we talked deep jungles. This was after Idi Amin's reign, so a lot of that whole thing was still there. So held at gunpoint going into these jungles. And strip searched and all the whole 9 yards to get in. And so we went into this deep jungle of Africa, drop in the middle of nowhere, walk in, and they're all singing Hillsong songs. And I remember at 20, wow. I had just been a believer for a year. I was more like, why, Lord, am I here? I don't belong here. But really just asked myself the question of, why? Why is this? And so I asked them, share with me some songs that are important to your lineage, the heritage of Jesus in this land. Sing in your language, the rhythm. Obviously, I'm studying the rhythms of Africa, so I want to hear all this. And they start playing, and the voice and everything, the atmosphere just changed. The way that they express their heart to the Lord, the way they process. And, I just saw, and I saw something interesting in that moment. It planted a seed. 16 years later, I think I've come to articulate what I saw in that really a lot of our innovation and our technology and our production models and everything has eclipsed the voice of the local church rather than equipped it. And I would like to see, rather than creating replicas, we go in and create creative ways to help that environment provide for their family, help that environment harvest the voice of their culture, whether that not just through music, but through business, through media, the arts, through research, whatever that is, because the gospel is going to get pressed out uniquely there. And I use two examples to share this. Is I have friends in China, the Underground Railroad in China, with churches that are hiding right now. They said, we were remarkably unified until America started sending us all of their materials. They said now there's just so much division because there's all these different books and different things. And so you look at just the production model of the products and selling, and you question and you wonder, America, we've been largely the teacher. And now I'm starting to learn that, we need to come in more as a learner. A disciple means a learner, and come up under their leadership, have them teach us, and then find ways to engraft the gospel. And so that's really what Garden City is about. The name is really what I believe to be the full gospel, and that Jesus does come to save sinners, but we have so boiled it down to that it's so individualized that we've forgot, well, Jesus came to fill all things. He came to redeem an entire creation. And the fact that our Bible starts with a garden, it ends with a city descending as if like a garden city. And we've focused so much on heaven. We go to heaven, and the Bible's trajectory seems like, no, the kingdom comes here. God is going to be here in a redeemed creation, one not built by hands, but built by him. So Garden City, to me, it just tells the gospel, just in the name, is that there's something to be made beautiful. The gospel makes everything beautiful, whether that be technology, like what we're talking about, whether that be business, whether that be the arts. And everybody's going to flesh out something different. I'll use another example of this. Like for Colorado, for instance, I always say, we have a homeless problem. But it's a very different homeless problem that Chicago has. Largely, Chicago's homeless problem is very real. Ours is based on marijuana and transients. And so I've met trust fund babies who are making millions from their parents, and they're living on the street because they've chosen that lifestyle. And so this is a perfect example of the same issue, but rather than creating big, huge models from corporate ideas, there's two different solutions to attacking that with the gospel, two different root problems, and communities have to have the tools and see themselves as innovative and creators in light of our Creator, to work with him to solve those problems in redemptive ways. And so Garden City just facilitates that, has a passion for that. It steps along and equips that wherever we can.
Wow. That's awesome. It sounds like something that's really needed. And maybe this is like simplifying it too much. It sounds like you guys want to help people find their language, to to worship, to express the story of God, but like do it in a way that is them, like that fits their community, fits what they look like. Would you say that that's correct?
Yeah, and also to give them structure in that. C.S. Lewis said that the downfall of humankind is to do everything that we think of. And I think that is amazing and insightful, in that the Bible does give us parameters around creativity. Creativity these days is just kind of like boundless, like do whatever you want. But we realize, like, if we were to produce a soccer field with no boundaries and say play the game, it would either be chaos and anarchy, or someone would have to be there and micromanage it all. They'd have to literally kind of be in there telling you what to do. But God made something so beautiful in that he put parameters around creation like a soccer field. And then he said, now go play freely. And then the gifts can shine. And so, it is something that's needed. And our current, some of our current structures and the way we do church, the way we do faith kind of undermines the priesthood of the believer. And kind of brings it into the, it's back kind of the age-old history of our church, kind of brings it into the hands of the professionals rather than into the hands of all spirit-filled believers. And we need to think through, some of our church models and some of the things we've thought through. I don't necessarily think they're helping us. I think they're actually hurting us. And just because it was a good idea, creative idea, doesn't necessarily mean you go there. And so I think there's Bible ways to go about that. And that's what we try to do, is not just help people say, oh, let's test that idea out and let's go do it. But say, okay, well, what's a biblical framework for creativity? What will keep us safe and let us flourish? And then now let's identify your unique gifts on that soccer field and put you in and let you go play. And as you play, out springs. So in Garden City, we focus a lot less on models. Models tend to be created by, individuals to kind of shape people towards their aim. The Bible much more functions on principles and paradigms. Is broad principles into meanings, and then paradigms of ways to think, so that when you're out on that field, you can operate freely, but that paradigm is always governing you. Paradigm might be, well, I'm on a team, That's a good paradigm. If you know you're on a team, that's going to shape the way you play. Now you're passing, you're shooting. So I'm just trying to use an analogy, but I think that's helpful when we start creating together, to know that it's not just boundless. There's good limits that the Lord puts there, but then he allows us to operate freely out of our uniqueness.
Yeah, I love that. And it kind of reminds me of what Dallas Willard talks about in his book, The Great Omission, where he describes how Jesus invested in these disciples, and after 3 years, they went out and changed the world to add things to the world to renew it. And as parents, he says that's kind of what we do as well, or what parents do as well, is they invest in their kids, they help them find their gifts and their unique place so that they can add to that city, the new city. So, maybe we're looking for not models necessarily of how to find or how to inspire our kids to use their gifts, but what are some paradigms or ways of thinking that we can be looking out for in our children's lives so that they can recognize what their gifts are?
Exactly. Yeah, and I guess I would offer maybe one helpful thing I guess I've done as a parent. And my kids, they're 10, 7, 5, and 2. So there's parents that are probably much better to speak into this. I was a youth pastor for many years, so I know youth, but to speak into people who are raising teenagers, I'm going, well, I'm unqualified, but I will say this is a general principle. This is not a model of parenting. When the Bible says train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are older, they will not depart from it. That word train in the Hebrew literally is paideia. It literally means to shape their palate and shape it in a way that when they ingest information, they can't help but swallow it. And so when we think about ourselves and our kids as, 5 sensory creatures, not only taste, touch, sight, sense, feel, where we have senses, we're also made up in different ways. We're sociological. We have a desire for people. We're mental beings. Some more mental than others. We're physical beings. We're spiritual beings. We're I can't remember the other ones. But so what we try to think through is, how can you creatively invite the best tasting things into your family in all those areas? So, you need to cultivate a deep and flourishing, beautiful picture of friendship when it comes to social. I don't want, I have people come to me all the time and say, well, you homeschool, so your kids aren't socialized all the while with their kids, off in the corner chewing their fingernails and playing video game. And I'm going, well, I have a very different view maybe of what social might look like. And then introducing things to their palate that gives them a taste for virtue. I grew up having junk food just available all the time. So when I got married, I just told my wife, I said, this is one area you are going to run for me. I'm not going to focus on this. I stink at it. She was really good at health. She still is. So I said, I'm just going to let you run this part of my life. And that's going to be your service to me. And when people ask me how I do the things I do, I always say it's because I have a powerful woman that's right there. She is able to keep me so that I can grow up and have bounce grandkids on my knee, which would not happen if she was not here. But I generated a palate, it's crazy, isn't it? When we start to think we're hungry and instantly we start craving a power drink or potato chips. And that's but science is telling us we're craving nutrients, and those are nutrient depleting. They're not nutrient rich. So we've literally started, our palate craves things that are killing us. It's fascinating. And so when, I introduce, with our kids, I'm just using food as an example at the table. You introduce nutrient rich food. When my kids get hungry, they'll literally ask for spinach as a snack. And people will say, well, that's impressive. They'll say that's impressive. And I'll just say, well, my wife gets the medal for that one because I wasn't raised that way. I still have a sweet tooth. I crave the wrong thing, even though I know it. And in that sin, our cravings and our desires, they've learned to crave things that we know will kill us. Like my friend Josh, he has a song on one of our Garden City albums that says, oh, I know but what's killing me, but I still don't want to die. And that's kind of the mantra of our culture. We know it's killing us, but we don't want it. We still are afraid of death. But that palate is so important. And I think as parents, that's a cool paradigm to not really come alongside parents and just say, do this with your kids. Make sure they don't see this movie and this movie and this movie. Instead of asking them, okay, how is this shaping your child's palate towards what is beautiful, what is virtuous, and what is the most nutritional, whether that be a movie that's the highest form of art, it's redeeming, whether that be technology that's shaping people and their palate towards good social progress, towards good thinking. There are some, but they're few and far between in this minefield of all these apps coming out. So I think that's a good paradigm that's helped me as a parent, because that's literally the question I ask myself when something happens. I don't ask myself, is this evil? Is this good? I don't stick it in that box. I stick it as, okay, how can this shape the palate? And that may cause me to choose a movie that has some questionable things in it for the sake of asking questions, to draw up the heart of my children, to see how they're processing some things. And I'm very careful what movies I introduce when, so that they're concepts they can follow. But I may introduce a movie that has, stuff in it that I don't like. And I think is, like Moana. Our kids are deeply in love with Moana. Isn't everybody's kid right now? Right. Younger kids. And if you look at it, the whole concept is pagan. But there is a redeemed creation. There's a character who, the femininity of that character, she portrays something, I believe, of virtue and strength. And there's some things in it that really cause us to wrestle. I talk to my girls and say there's some really amazing qualities in the main characters. I say, I want you to think through this. I mean, I don't want you to go swimming in the ocean when I tell you not to. That was a bad decision. Obey your parents. But, but I think that palate training is helpful because it helps give a grid through which to pull things so that you don't have to just operate in this, don't do that, don't do that. I mean, that's Christians or the world. Do that. Try it until you know it's wrong. That's the world. So it finds a balance in this gray area, which is where most things fall.
Yeah, that's really well put. And I love just the analogy that you were giving of our palates with food, but then also the palates for our life. So and you mentioned it a little bit just with Moana, but what are some ways that technology can be redeemed and kind of come alongside as you try to determine okay, how do I create a healthy palate for my child?
Yeah. Well, I think, one thing that's fascinating, I'll go back to kind of my research is in the early church. And I find it fascinating. I'll mention this, so I think it'll illustrate a point. But the early church had this idea, every picture you see of them, they're around a table. They're facing each other. And this was the idea of perichoresis. The perichoresis, fancy theological term, meaning God dances with each other. This was kind of a theological idea of what God looks like in the Trinity, the relationship of the Trinity. And every picture is this way. And after about 325, when Constantine legalized Christianity, you start seeing the architecture of the buildings go like this. It gets longer and it gets longer. And then you get the leadership more away from the congregation. The congregation's here. And then when we start introducing it as leader and laity, and then we start separating sacred and secular, and we start getting all these weird terms. And now it's the band and audience. And not only now the building is elongated, but now that it's elevated. So when we get up and we say things like, it's about loving one another, it's not about the stage, it's not about the lights, the environment is undermining the message. It's not speaking the message. I used to street preach, and I'd tell people, I get out there, I'd be like, God's a father. He loves you as his kids. He's adopting you in his family. He calls the church a household, like all family images, right? The hardness of the street corner undermines the message. And when I started bringing it into my home and realizing, well, when you start talking about Father loves Jesus like a son, he has our brother, he's the husband over his bride, the church. You're visually seeing, the church as a household, that the environment is preaching the message. I always say sermons need to be audio and video. I think we've just dumbed it down to just audio. Not short clips from YouTube. That's not what I mean by video, but a visual kingdom. And why I use this analogy is technology usually is categorized today as what is electronic and what is digital. That's all we know is technology. But right now, this futon I'm sitting on is technology. This house I'm living in is technology. The air that's cooling this house is technology. And those are all forming how we're relating to the world. And I think we need to widen our view of technology and say, how is this, that long building, it really has turned church into a spectator sport. Faith is a spectator sport now. It's a consumption model. It's not a production model. So that's why Garden City is a production company, but we measure our success on one thing, how much we get churches producing. Not products, but just making beauty, taking their gifts and just expressing it in ways that are faith-filled. And I think that's one way we can look at technology a little bit more broad these days, because usually when you say tech, one of the biggest ones is what Elon Musk is doing, what Apple's doing, what Amazon is doing. Those are the things that kind of come to mind. But some of these more subtle things that are shaping our day-to-day life. I used a term in our questions, the theology of technology, thinking that everything has a theology. Everything has a vision of the good life that they're pressing out through us. And everything is going to be formational. And it's crazy, the power, like my little smartphone. Let's go to the electronic. It literally now has the power to shape my character. If that app doesn't move fast enough, now that's fruit of the Spirit. Patience is now challenged. If I'm, cyberbullying and all that stuff, it now has the ability to draw me into a place of unkindness and not self-controlled, as opposed to kind and self-controlled, the fruit of the Spirit. It's crazy how technology now has moved to a place where it can actually shape our affections. And that's just the age-old thing of idolatry in the Bible. These are just golden calves. And so we have to ask ourselves, that's why I say why behind the lie. We have to ask ourselves, why am I using this tool? How is it shaping me? Is this helpful? Because there's so much of it's really subtle. And the reason why I use the analogy I did is just so much of it is, we just say, well, electronics, media, tech. But there's everything we're sitting on, breathing in, and living in is technology. And it all has a worldview. Every piece of technology has a worldview.
Yeah. And so, like, you're hitting on this topic. Andy Crouch in his book Culture Making has hit on it. Craig Detweiler and iGods has also kind of hit on the topic. You guys seem to all be indicating that we were made to create and to cultivate technology, the garden to the city kind of idea as a way of worship. How do parents encourage their teenagers to do that?
I also would say, I'll just pick up on what you said, and another shameless plug for Garden City. No, I'm just kidding. But you said from a garden to a city. The mandate of creation was take this habitable wilderness, which I think is largely what Genesis 1 focuses on. We've made it a science book. It's absolutely not. It's a pastoral document written to Israel from Moses while they were wandering in the desert. So that should change how we read all of Genesis. But they are making this habited place, and God says, take it to the uninhabited. And all of creativity, really all it does is it just orders chaos. That's all it is. God the Spirit hovered over the waters, and all was formless and void. He just took the pieces and put them together. That's what we do when we cook. We take these meaningless ingredients that taste disgusting, to be honest, by themselves, and we throw them together, and they make amazing things. I'm a songwriter, so I take lyrics and prose and language and melody and rhythm, and I just throw them together in a way that makes sense. And that is the work of God. It's to make sense of things that are formless and void. And so I would reverse even what you just said in that, and I think what you said is good, in that we have this garden moving into city. So the simplicity of the garden kind of growing up into all the technology that we know today. And that technology either points towards the reality of the gospel, or it points away. What we miss in the early chapters of Genesis, Cain was one of the biggest innovators. After he murdered Abel, he went away, and we know him as he crossbred animals. Many of the crossbreeding that we know of today came from him. He built cities. He built instruments. Like, he was a culture creator. It was just shaped from a murderous, rebellious, bitter heart. And heart becomes our art. We have that come out. And so I would reverse it also to say, if you live in a city now that looks more like Cain, that has a harsh look to it, a murderous architecture, a harshness to the environment, there is a way now to, like a seed, simply plant an idea in the bedrock of where you're at, and it grows into these little gardens within cities. It grows up in something that was hard and disheveled, and that's ultimately what church planting is. We plant something beautiful, a city within a city, community, and it starts to blossom, and it makes these little palatial garden type places of civility that people want to come to, and they're within these harsh cities. And that's really what the church is. It's not just a people of God, it's a city of God. When God said to Abraham, I will multiply you. If we look back in the Hebrew, much of that is city language. It's not just this place on a corner. It's a whole culture that's making beauty. And, how much do we, on church services, we get people up and we undermine that just by the pastor and the missionaries are the only people who do ministry moments. But we've got up before in our churches like an engineer, and I've had businessmen come up crying and saying, I never knew the gospel was for me. Wow. I never knew the gospel was for my job. And people don't see that their job has theological purpose. I had a city planner come to me, and we did a project in our church, and they said, I'm not creative. I can't do anything. And so I said, you're a city planner, right? And he said, yeah. He's like, that's not theological. And I said, like, heck, it's not. If you go to Europe, everything is built in circles. And there's a center hub, usually where all the churches are. Their view is it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. That's where we get this idea of perichoresis, face to face. So they built cities in circles because it was the image of the Trinity turned in on itself. The theological church, there's theological city planning. In America, everything runs in parallel. Theological. It shapes how we relate to each other, right? We're running away from each other towards something else, but never toward one another. And so these things, all of these things become artistic. And I think these are, these are some of the things that we should think about, that creative work is the work of every Christian.
Hmm.
It says in the beginning, God created. So God is like around himself all day long. I'm sure he's in love, like perfectly in love. Nothing's ever broken. No sin's ever happening. No, repentance has to ever happen. And so what makes our God sit down and think, I need to create something today? The only motivation was this love is so intoxicating, I cannot help but share it.
Mm.
And what's the first response? I'm going to create. And I think that's interesting for us. In the first response to a loving God loving us, our first response should be to create.
Hmm.
Because our first response is to take what's formless and void and make it tangible and edible for somebody else. Because we want them to experience it too. Yeah. And creativity is everything. It's fellowship, it's evangelism, it goes into every work, vocation, work, play, home, everywhere. It's who we are. But think about even how our churches are set up. We go in, we consume the creativity of maybe a few 5 or 6 songwriters or people, and it's just songs and songwriters from the day, and we leave. There's never a moment where we create together.
Hmm.
And yet, my studies of the early church, the first 300 years, there was a significant role that they had in creating together when they were together. They ate together and they created together. And there's something you also, I'm sure you guys know through your own creativity, there's a way you learn things when you create. It becomes part of you deeper than if you would have just learned it didactically, someone preaching it at you. So I think my bottom line answer, it changes everything.
Wow. This is blowing my mind. That's so good though, because that encourages like parents who are watching this, who maybe like their job is like their stay-at-home mom or businessmen, like you are encouraging them to widen their perspective of what it means to create and to encourage like to kind of shift that mindset for kids as well of like, do you want to be like the kingdom of God is something to be a part of, not to watch happen. And so like to encourage parents to put that mindset into their child almost.
That's good news.
Yeah. And even, I would say even just not even deprioritizing the homemaker. I'm over prioritizing the homemaker because I'm saying that I think there's a reason God didn't start with a 501c3. He didn't start with a business. He didn't start with the government. He started with a home, a family, and a marriage and a meal. That's where he started. And that is something, he is so brilliant because that is something that works in every time, in any place, and under any circumstance. How many of our models work in any time, any place, or any circumstance? Probably none. Our creativity usually works more towards the broken than towards the place of lasting forever. But it really is the simplicity and that civility, that civil virtue was formed around the table, was formed in that marriage, was formed in the table, and then it broke from there. And today we say, leadership is always like, go to this leadership institute, go to this college. Everything's formed without, right? It's all over here. You develop leadership skills in the marketplace. And scripture is very different. It says, if you're going to be an elder, for instance, in a church, it's like you have to run your family right. That's like a first qualification. So scripture is saying leadership is forged in the home. And that is a huge role because if we're, as parents, we're creating a palette for how our sons and daughters are going to lead, how, the kind of palette they're going to shape in their children for the food they're going to eat, how they're going to run their home. Are they going to be closed home, which is anti-gospel? Are they going to be completely open home where everybody's free to go all the time? Well, that's not helpful either. How are they going to shape their home so that they prioritize family, they reach the lost? There's all sorts of creative ways. Like for one instance, I just thought about something I did with my kids the other day. We have all sorts of transients in Colorado. So, one of the things is just to kind of drive by and hand them your change. And so I started getting a conversation with my children and said, is that really what the gospel's about? Just handing people money? I said, really, I think it's about meeting all the felt needs so that you have time to think about the spiritual needs. That, Maslow hierarchy of needs. There's some good to that and bad to that. We won't get into that. But So we just started making these bags, these little sacks that cost about $15 each, and you fill them with like a towel that will, like a backpacking towel, and a couple bars for full meals, and a little miniature Bible. And we put like full kits for them to clean themselves, and hygiene, and woolen socks, and different things like that. And then when you give them a bag, you have a chance to have a wholehearted conversation about the gospel. Because the gospel meets all of their physical needs. It meets Jesus' concern with everything about them. But that was shaping my children through the home of how to go about meeting people's needs. It's not, when we do just throw money, it's great, but we're giving a very limited taste of what the gospel actually does. And so that palette, thinking about that palette, you're always thinking in your kids, how are they viewing what I'm doing right now? And are they seeing the fullness of the gospel? And that changes everything.
Yeah. Well, this has been an incredible interview. But if maybe there's some parents out there that want to dive deeper into a lot of these topics, what are some resources that you could suggest for them, that especially if they have more questions about how to do this?
Well, Axis, I'm going to plug you all.
Thank you.
And Jason was actually very, very helpful in helping us get a live stream conference started. We just got done 3 days ago, so I'm tired. You guys aren't tired yet, but I'm tired. And we produced over 300 hours of content. We introduced 150 speakers over 2 weeks, all on this. And it's at makejesusculture.com, and we have people talking from sculptors to homemakers to graphic designers, businessmen, politicians, you name it. There are people talking about this. And we've created guides for people to walk through and questions in different, and then we've created a model of circles, getting together in Trinitary one another community, eating together, learning and fleshing out some of these ideas together, but taking a step further. Say, now I want you to create together and see what that does. So there's lots of tools there. Obviously, you can go over to the Garden City Project and see the plethora of things that have grown out of what we've done. We just kind of started the simple model. Our model is literally just get them together around a meal, learn about God, and create together in ways that bring the gospel to those who are lost. That's really our only model. And once that starts happening, then out of that just comes these little gardens. And Garden City Project just posts that. We just post it for people to see. Not in a sense to say buy our product, because we don't want to eclipse the local church and the local family. We want to equip them to say, okay, now we did this just by doing this simple little thing. We want you to go and do likewise. So we can hear what your voice has to say. We can see the beauty coming from your family, and we can see how you creatively meet the needs of the fatherless, the widow, the orphan, the oppressed, and the least of these. We want to see that uniqueness come out of you. And so we've always just kind of taken that underhanded model of coming under them and saying, how can we press up what's already going on here, instead of kind of coming this way and saying, how can we overlay what you're doing here with what we're doing? So those are some great resources, and they're all geared towards doing a lot of what Axis is doing, develop conversations, allowing things to emerge. And, that's a lot what we're doing. So makejesusculture.com, that just got finished. We're going to be posting the 300 hours of content over the next few weeks as we get it all edited and stuff like that. You guys know that process. And then Garden City Project, we want people to submit their art. It's not just some come and consume. We want you to create with us. How it was built was people submitting their art from all over the world. I think at our conference we had 50 countries represented, and just all these different people. We want to hear the kingdom of God, and it's a beautiful thing, and it comes through every tribe, every tongue, every race, every creed. There's beauty there, and we want to celebrate what's beautiful. And so, to whoever's listening right now, parents and teens, there's something incredibly beautiful to your family that says kingdom in a way that my family could never say kingdom. And I want to hear about it. And I want to portray it so the world can see, because, there's enough people on social media portraying ugly and saying this is what the kingdom of the world's like, and they've got all sorts of different angles on it, and it's just getting gross. So I would like to be a light within that, and I think it's redeeming to everything, including technology.
Wow. That's perfect. I think you said it all.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Dave, for taking the time. This has been awesome.
Thank you. Been a pleasure. Hope, man, that's a lot to weave into 30 minutes. I hope
It was, but you did it well, very well.
Okay.
So impressive.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dave.